story. I'm joined in the studio now by an expert in foreign affairs, the writer and lawyer Marco Vicenzino. Marco, they failed to reach this deal then. What does this mean in the short term?
Basically, for a 48-hour to 2 to 3 day period, the United States, the National Security Agency, will be without the ability to do mass data collection by phones, being able to monitor lone wolf suspects, and also you have the idea of roving wiretaps. So basically, since it's the first time since the passage of the Freedom Act 14 years, the passage of the Patriot Act 14 years ago, that the National Security Agency is left without any form of these powers. Eventually, it's been accepted that the Patriot Act will be replaced by the Freedom Act, but basically due to miscalculations by the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, this 48 gap period has happened.
So the NSA can't do what it's been sort of so publicly harangued for doing in the States. Is this being seen as a victory for civil liberties?
But we have to make one thing clear about what this whole thing about metadata is. Basically, in the in public, it seems that the NSA is doing wiretaps. It's directly listening to people's phone calls. What this whole issue is about, basically, is that for a long time, the National Security Agency has had the ability to monitor phone calls, not the content of the phone calls. Basically is who called who, so two numbers calling each other, and the amount of time that phone call lasts. In order to do the tapping, you still need a search warrant. So that's important to clarify. In terms of civil liberty, is this a victory or not? I would say that it depends. It's a matter of degree. For those who are opposed to the Patriot Act and see the Freedom Act as something more realistic, as more adapted to the realities of today, yes, they can claim a victory. But the fact is that many civil libertarians are still very much dissatisfied with the new Freedom Act. They'll just say that it's an upgraded version of the Patriot Act. More restrictions, but the bulk of the Patriot Act and what it called for still remains.
So essentially, an act of some sort is going to get passed in the next few days, but just in the short term, this has been stopped. This Patriot Act has been stopped in its tracks, and has been stopped by this guy Rand Paul. Seems to have taken it upon himself to attack the extension of the Patriot Act. But he's been accused of putting presidential ambitions over national security. Do you see that as being a big issue?
Well, his opponents within his own party, for example, Senator John McCain, the same party as Senator Rand Paul, basically said he's unfit to be president, that it was irresponsible to leave the country for a 48-hour period without any form of having the ability to do surveillance. So if you look at it, it wasn't really a victory for Rand Paul. He can claim that for a 48-hour period he succeeded. But I think for the most part, it's a process that was going on of a transition from the Patriot Act to the Freedom Act. That gap is a serious one for 48 hours, and you had a politician who was heavily opposed to the Patriot Act and even the Freedom Act, you could say he's also largely not in favor of. But it's a temporary victory. But overall, within the grand scope of things, it's more politics than anything else.
What will Obama be thinking about all this? He's obviously thinking about his legacy as he comes to the end of his second term.
I mean, Obama, he supported the Freedom Act is largely a compromise. He supported the Freedom Act. The House of Representatives has passed the Freedom Act. What his anger will be is the fact that you have this 48-hour gap. Ultimately, the passage of the Freedom Act will happen. He'll be satisfied with that. He supported it. But once again, it's that issue of the 48 hours, that gap, that it presents real dangers in many ways. Will a terrorist attack because of it? Unlikely, but you can't exclude that possibility. And if it does happen, so people at the top are going to have to accept responsibility for it. But I think for the most part, the president is getting what he wants. It's just a matter of timing.
With the election coming up, how significant would any kind of split within the Republican Party be with just sort of a year ago to this election? You
see, Rand Paul represents the libertarian wing of the party, and it's a portion of the party. You can debate the numbers of what percentage they constitute. But I think for the most part, what will happen is that this will be used within the Republican Party, within the Republican debates that begin in the coming months. This will be used against Rand Paul, against him by other Republican candidates to basically hurt him. So in that sense, we go back to politics. In terms of legalities, we know what's going to happen. But in terms of politics, and particularly for the Republican Party, this is something that goes to the core of the party in terms of the national debate. You still have that thing between national security and civil liberties. 14 years after 9/11, it's still a debate that's at the center of American politics.
And how big an issue is this story in America? Is it really splitting the public there?
What's it splitting the public? It causes concern. What's splitting the public is actually the debate. Once again, this national security against civil liberties. That's something that will continue for the foreseeable future. In terms of this specific episode of the 48-hour gap, yeah, I think for the most part there is a major public concern. It's dominating media headlines, basically saying that terrorists will be roaming for free for the next 48 hours. That's the sort of gist of it. But the reality is that even the intelligence services can have ways to circumvent these inabilities for this 48-hour gap.
Yep, great. Marco Vicenzino, all very interesting. Thank you very much, Steve, for
Thank
coming
you.
in.